Well, here we are again. I'm using a little bit different lighting. I got a new microphone, and I don't have any script. I don't use notes. I'm just kind of shooting from the hip. I talk in layman's terms. I was going to make my MGTOW topic fatherly influence. Um, when I was a kid, my dad collected antique cars. He was a sign painter. He did auto body work. He was also a farmer. He came from a big family. He had been drafted into the Army and did like a 2-year stint when there was still a draft. Went overseas, came back. It was peacetime when he was in. Married a small town girl. They've been married nearly 60 years now. Very traditional, good people. They adopted me from a local hospital. I'd been born to an unwed teenage mother, and it speaks to the character of my parents that they took in an orphan. 3 years after I'd been adopted, they adopted again. They adopted a girl. And then about 3 years after that, they began having their own biological children. And when it was all said and done, there was 6 of us. 4 natural-born children and 2 of us that had been adopted. I can see the characteristics of my parents in their biological children. I can see the physical attributes they've inherited from my parents, and even the personality traits that that they have are reflective of my parents. I inherited things from my parents. The newest vehicle I've ever owned is a 1987 vehicle. I've got an affinity for the older model cars and motorcycles because I grew up in that environment. Antiques were a big deal around our home, and I've carried that with me all my life. My dad was a really hard worker, and I attributed a lot of my work ethic to his example. You know, my biological dad I met later in life. I'd never known him, and he was a murderer and a thief and a real son of a bitch. And his mom, my grandmother, she'd been a prostitute most of her life. I met her too. I've got to give some credence to inherited traits. I'm not making excuses for who I am, but you do inherit certain qualities biologically. I met my natural mother, my biological mother. I met her dad and her brother and sister, and meeting these blood-related people helped me to understand myself a little better. Why I'm wired the way I am. I growing up had an uncle who was about 3 years older than me, so he was like a big brother. And he influenced me quite a bit. I looked up to him. He was older. He talked about girls and he talked about music. and he talked about culture and likes and dislikes, and influenced me to a big degree. I looked up to him, and these are all, in a manner of speaking, fatherly influences, biological and environmental. You know, where you're at and where you're from. Um, I had uncles and aunts that, as a kid, you're influenced by the people you're around to a massive degree, and the television you're exposed to, and the music you're exposed to. All these things, it's data. All this stuff is data. It's programming, and you know the product that we are, the product we become. It's the amass of data that we've taken in, and how it's processed, and the culmination of it is what you see. Um, you know, when I look back, it's a good thing about getting older. When I look back on the men and women in my life, and the friends who've come and gone, and people I know today, I uh, I know what I admire. I know what I aspire to. I know what I like, and a lot of that is through experience. I know what doesn't work, and I know what the outcomes of certain behaviors are. So I'd like to think that as a result of attaining wisdom, I've developed this appreciation for high ideals and ethics, but I'm not consistent. I I fall to my base nature. Uh, you know, uh, I do it cognitively, though. I do it knowingly. Uh, when I screw up, it's almost intentionally. Uh, you know, like these cigarettes. I'll. It's been a while, but I've had occasion where people have come up to me and said, you know, those things are going to kill you. You know, they're bad for you, and I don't know how to respond to that because I've got all the same information they do, but they tell me that as though I might not have heard it before. What I'm doing with intent. I'm doing by design, my own design, right or wrong, you know, and we all do that. I met a guy once, and I asked him what he did for a living, and he said he was into branding. And in the context of conversation, I'd associated that remark with like marketing. And I said, is that the kind of genre you're talking about? You're a marketer? And he said, no. He said, it's akin to it, but it's very different. He said, we want to make you loyal to a brand. We strive to make you loyal to a product. Chevrolet, Marlboro, Levi's, uh, Budweiser, whatever it is. He said, we want to have you in a relationship where you're loyal to a particular product and your money is spent uh, consistently on that product. You identify with that. It becomes a part of you. He said, that's what our objective is. And he said, like, for instance, he said, you probably got a motorcycle. And I said, yeah, I do. And he said, it's probably a Harley. I said, no, it's not. It's not a Harley. He said, well, all right. He said, well, you got the boots, you got the blue jeans, you got the tank top on, probably got a pickup. And at the time, I did have a pickup. I said, yeah, I do have a pickup truck. And he says, yeah. He says, you got your Marlboros. He says, you got all these things that fit into a particular demographic. But he said, you don't talk like I'd think you would. You don't sound like the genre that I'd put you in. He says, you speak in a different manner. I took that as a compliment that I didn't sound like just a sheer product of my environment, but that I was a thinking person, and I appreciated that. In any event, I I know from firsthand experience, as do you all, that we're influenced by our peers, the people we look up to. I mean, the way we dress, the the things we value, um, even this MGTOW experience. Uh, I remember as a boy, my dad worked hard, and he would always remark about the this the effort he had to put in to getting the money to feed us kids, to keep the lights on. That it's all such a struggle, and we'd better appreciate it. And I got tired of hearing that after a while. I mean, I didn't cause him to take on all these children and take on the marriage and overseeing the home, all the bills that come with it. That was his own doing. But I think as I progressed into life, I didn't want that burden on me. That he made it so clear that it was a burden to him, and I thought, my God, I don't want to have that on my shoulders through life. All that all that grief, because he made it abundantly clear that it wasn't easy for him to keep the whole thing afloat. And and it's probably my nature to a big degree that makes me want to travel light in a manner of speaking. I don't want to take on a whole bunch of responsibilities. What's the point of doing that? I know it's been statistically verified that married men over the course of their life make more money. Well, they have to. They don't really have a choice. They've got much more in the way of obligation. They got a bigger plate to fill, and married men with children, they're in a position where they've got to provide for not only themselves, for however many there are. It's on him, for the most part, to make it happen. And just I've carried that all through my life. And a lot of that, like I say, could be my nature, but I think my dad's constant reminding me and the other kids of his hardship, like, this ain't easy. You'd better appreciate it. Oh, it's tough. But he said it in such a begrudging way. I believed him, and I just thought, man, I don't want to sound like that someday. Like regretful, because that kind of is how it came out in the end. It's almost though he kind of begrudged you. You're a pain in his ass, But it's no mystery. We're influenced. I asked that marketing guy when I was talking to him that branding guy. Why advertisers advertisers cater to the younger people so much. And he said, I'd also mentioned that it seemed to me the older people had the money. Why not go after the older people in marketing? Because that's where the money's at. And he said that the older people aren't as easily swayed. They're not as easily influenced. They're kind of set in their ways. They know what they like. You're not going to convince them real easy. But the younger people are malleable. You can influence them. You can manipulate them. And you go after them in advertising because you can sway them. You can convince them. Well, shoot, I can't argue with that. That makes sense. We're impressionable. The younger we are, the more impressionable we are. And we take those things forward with us. The influence of our peers, fatherhood, those guys that were older. I mean, I'm not baffled when I hear about the high murder rates in these big cities with these young guys killing each other. They develop their value system, this mentality they got in an environment where they were influenced by people that thought as such. And it's just a cycle of dysfunction that until you get positive role models in this environment, it's going to continually perpetuate and no end to it. I don't see it turning around anytime soon. Recently, I used to work at a gentleman's club, a titty club. Recently, two girls died within the span of a month, and I knew them both. And one of them that died, real pretty girl. She was real smart. It's a shame that she's dead. I'd call her a friend, and I can't believe she's dead. But I remember when I first met her, I was talking to her, and I think she brought it up that she'd been addicted to heroin. And I told her, well, I've never done heroin, my understanding is it's a hard drug to get away from. It's really addictive. And we talked about it a little bit, and she said something about Kurt Cobain, the singer from that grunge band who died from suicide. And he was famously a heroin addict. And she talked about him like she really admired him, like he was somebody she looked up to, that in a manner of emulation, like she wanted to be like him. And when I heard that she overdosed on heroin and she was dead, and she's only like 22 years old, I thought about that conversation where she mentioned this guy that had died of suicide and how she looked up to him, and he'd been a heroin addict, and it's a shame, and I'm disappointed that I didn't have more of an influence on her, that somehow I wasn't able to change her value system, through my conversation, through my ideas, to a more positive way of thinking, But that's the way it goes, I suppose. Well, I'm going to play this back and see what it sounds like. Thank you.